Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss about the Kubernetes resource creation. Okay. So in our day 7 class, what we have discussed? In our day 7 class, we discussed about the Kubernetes options. We have first option, which is Minikube. You're good to run your Kubernetes cluster in Minikube. The second option which we have is online portal. In online portal also, we are good to have our cluster. And the third option which we are going to use throughout our session is AKS cluster. Okay. Apart from that, we discussed about the kubectl installation. What is the main purpose of kubectl? The main purpose of the kubectl is to interact to our API server, and whatever the request we are going to send, it would be initiated by kubectl only. Okay. So to save the time, I have already created a cluster name called as demo-AKS. If you have any doubt or any concern how to create a AKS cluster, you're good to check the day 7 video again. Okay. So let's discuss today's agenda. So today we are going to discuss about the options of Kubernetes resource creation. So in Kubernetes, we have two options to create the resource. Okay. The first option is using kubectl command. Okay. And the second option which we have is using YAML configuration. Okay. Firstly, we are going to discuss about the kubectl implementation. Then we are going to discuss about the YAML implementation. So let's start. As I have mentioned, I have already created a cluster name called as demo-AKS. So the first step which I'm going to do, I'm going to connect to my AKS cluster. So I'll click on demo-AKS, then I'll click on connect. I'll set the subscription, and here I'll open my CMD. The first command I'm going to run AZ login, although it is not a mandatory if you are already logged in, so good to ignore it. It is going to open a terminal for me. I'm going to click on my user ID. I have successfully, so it is retrieving the tenants and subscription. I'm good to press enter. Okay, so I've already selected the subscription, so this command is not required. I will click on the download cluster credential. What is happening under the hood when we are initiating this command? We are going to have a separate discussion in our authentication and authorization video. Okay, let me copy it and enter. Let me clear the screen. So right now what we have done, we already have a cluster name called as demo-AKS, and we have connected this cluster from our local machine. The first thing which we have done is AZ login to connect our account. The second thing which we have done, we have set the subscription, and the third step is to, I would say, download the credential of our AKS cluster. Okay, as we have discussed in our whiteboard, the first step which we are going to discuss is about the kubectl. Okay, so the first command is kubectl get nodes. Okay, if you see here, how many nodes are coming? One node. And the we already have very detailed discussion. We have master plane. This one in AKS term, it is managed by the cloud provider, so we do not have the access for this one, but we have our worker node. Whenever we are creating our cluster, we are creating what? Worker node. This one is called node pool, and this one is also a node pool. and the name of this node pool is agent pool, and this one is worker pool. Okay, and as we have discussed, it is mandatory to have one agent pool which is run on the configuration of system, and we are good to have n numbers of our user pool. Okay, and in this node pool, how many nodes we have created? We have created only one node. In the same way, here I have created one node. That's why it is showing only one node here. Okay, so the command to list our nodes is kubectl gets node. The second command is kubectl get nodes hyphen o void. Okay, so if you see here, the difference between the first and the second command is it provides more information in terms of what is the internal IP, what is the external IP, which operating system image we have used, what is the kernel version, what is the container runtime. If you want more information, then you have to mention hyphen o void. Okay. The third command is kubectl get pods. Okay. Currently, if you see, we do not have any pods. If you see here, it is mentioned no resources found in default namespace. What is namespace? We are going to have a dedicated session, so please ignore it for now, but we do not have any pods. Okay, so let me quickly create a pod. To create a pod, the first command is kubectl. What is the functionality of the kubectl? To connect to our API server. Okay, the second command is run. Run command is basically responsible to create and start our pod, or good to say containers. And this one is what? Nginx. Nginx is a name of my pod. And finally, this is the image. Image means eventually, what is the exact meaning of image? As we have discussed, the smallest unit is pod, and pod can have multiple container inside it. So each container requires what? Image. We already have very detailed discussion regarding this one in our Docker session. Okay, so eventually after running this command, it is going to create a pod, a name called nginx1. Let's press enter and see our pod has been created. If I'm going to run a command called kubectl get pods, and showing my pod is ready and the status is running, restart 0 time, and what is the age of my pod? Around 8 seconds ago we have initiated it. Okay, so if we want to get more information regarding the pod, we are good to mention kubectl get pods hyphen o and again void. If you see here, the difference between the first and the second command is hyphen o void. Here you will have more information in terms of what is the IP of this pod, on which node this pod has been created, nominated node, and readiness gates is none, and we are good to ignore it now because we are going to have a, as I have mentioned, we are going to have a dedicated session regarding this one. Okay, so if you are going, if you are mentioning hyphen o void in nodes, we are getting more information. The same thing in terms of pod also, if you are mentioning hyphen o void, we are getting more information. Okay, so right now, as I have mentioned, what we have done, we have created a pod. Okay, so we need to log in inside this pod. Eventually we need to log in inside the container. So the command is kubectl, okay, exec hyphen it. What is my pod name? Nginx hyphen hyphen sh. Oh, there is one typo. kubectl. See, currently we are inside the pod. If I'm going to mention pwd, it is showing in a root one. So what is the exact meaning of this command? Kubectl, as we have discussed a number of times, kubectl is going to interact to our API server. Exec means kubectl is going to execute, -it means interactive, and we have discussed all this thing in our Docker session. Okay, if you have any doubt in and you're not able to understand, please go through our Docker discussion. Okay, so it is going to create what? Interactive terminal. And then this is my pod name, and this is the first shell script which is going to be created for us. Okay, and we are inside the container. So we are good to mention exit and enter. One more thing, right now what we are doing, we have only one container present inside this pod. Okay, so we are good to mention container and pod, it is fine. In our upcoming example, I'm going to create a multiple containers inside the pod. Okay, so right now I'm good to mention pod or container, both of them are same only. Okay, next command is kubectl describe pod and the pod name. If you see here, after running this command kubectl describe pod and the pod name, we are getting n number of information. And we have detail about the name, what is the namespace, what is the service account, start time, levels, annotation, status. Means, as I mentioned, it will have A to Z information regarding our pod. Okay, the same way we are good to describe our node also. So let me list our node kubectl get nodes, and let me describe one node kubectl describe node, and the node, let me take this agent pool one. I'm going to press enter. As I mentioned, for node also it is providing the whole information regarding what is the name, roles, labels, annotations, the condition, the capacity, and all this thing. It is clearly mentioned about each and everything about the node also. Okay, so the main purpose of describe command is to provide a detailed information regarding the pod or node. In future, what we are going to do, when we are going to learn the other objects of Kubernetes, at that time we'll try is it describe command is working for them or not. Okay, but in terms of troubleshooting, describe command play a very important role. By describing any pod and node, we are good to get some information. The last command which we have is kubectl cluster-info. Cluster information is going to provide the information regarding our cluster in terms of control plane, core DNS, and metric server. Okay, and the last command which we have is kubectl explain pod. Okay, if you see here, after running this command called kubectl explain pod, it is showing about the information. Okay, information means in terms of, if you check this description, pod is a collection of containers that can run on a host. This resource is created by client and scheduled on to host. So if you are creating any object outside deployment, okay, you do not have much information what is the purpose of deployment, why we need it. Okay, so we are good to run command called kubectl explain deployment. You'll get the information regarding this one. Okay, see, deployment enable declarative update for pod and replica set. If you want more details, check this community, you'll have the more information regarding this one. Okay, apart from that, You're good to mention pod in Kubernetes. See, this is official documentation of Kubernetes, and you're good to go through this details to get more understanding regarding the pod. For other configuration tools also, it has a very detailed documentation regarding each and every object in our Kubernetes. Right now it is not required, but for reference I'm saying. Okay, you're good to check the Kubernetes blog. Okay, so with this we have discussed the important commands of kubectl. Okay, so the kubectl, the first command which we have discussed is get nodes. Okay, the second command we discussed using -o void to get more information. In the same way, we created one pod kubectl run and my pod name hyphen image name, and then we log in inside the pod, and then we discuss about the describe command. I mean, even for describe, we are good to describe our pod, our node, and in future we'll discuss like our deployment services or any other object. Are we good to describe it or not? But for information, I mentioned in troubleshooting environment, it is really required to run this command to get some information. Okay. Okay. So with this, we have completed our kubectl discussion. Okay. The second thing which we need to discuss is our YAML file. YAML is a prerequisite to understand before learning the Kubernetes configuration. Okay, so I'm going to attach a video. In this video I have a detailed discussion regarding the YAML, so please go through it, and if you're already aware about the YAML, then please skip it.
Hello everyone. So today we are going to discuss about YAML. Okay. So the first question which we need to understand why we need to learn YAML. Okay. This is the first question which we need to understand why we need to learn YAML. Okay. I'd say if you are learning anything in Docker or in Kubernetes, in Ansible, Helm, CI/CD, or also any DevOps tools, any DevOps tools, if you're learning, what you have to write a configuration files. Okay, and what is the main purpose of this configuration file is to connect to our target APIs. If you are working on Docker, then you need to interact the Docker APIs. The same thing for Kubernetes, Ansible, Helm, CI/CD, or DevOps tools, like any other DevOps tool. What eventually you want to interact, we want to interact to the target APIs. And if you are going to write this configuration file in plain English, do you think it would work? Means in a plain English, I'm going to write whatever I want to create in Docker or in Kubernetes or any other DevOps tools. Do you think it would work? My answer is no. Okay, so what we need to do, we need to use a data serialization language. Okay, so what is the main purpose of data serialization language? The main purpose of the data serialization language is to interact to our target APIs. Okay, and one of the base data serialization language which we have is YAML. Okay, apart from YAML, we have two more data serialization language. One it is JSON, and the third one is Excel. Okay, but if you compare the uses of the other data serialization language, YAML has the mostly used in the data serialization. So the next question come into our mind: why we need to use YAML in comparison to the other data serialization language like JSON and XML. Already written this JSON and XML file. Let's do a quick comparison between them. Okay, I've opened my Visual Studio Code and let me open. The first file is regarding the YAML. The second file which we have, it is regarding the JSON one, and the third file which is opened, it is for uh, XML. Okay, so if you see in this YAML, JSON or XML file, what we are trying to achieve, we have mentioned the same content, okay, in terms of microservices, and then we have passed some key and value. But in terms of reading the file, which one you feel like it will be more easier, YML, JSON, or XML? According to me, the answer is this one. In terms of reading and understanding the file, YAML is a straightforward. Why? The other case of writing also, if you're going to write the XML or JSON file, it would be a bit complicated. Why? Because JSON works on the principle of curly braces. Okay. The second one, XML works on the principle of tags. But the YAML only works on the principle of indentation. Okay. We are going to have a very detailed discussion. What is indentation? How we are going to achieve it? But right now we need to focus only one thing. In comparison to JSON and XML file, in terms of reading or writing the file, YAML is more user friendly. YAML is more user friendly. That's why YAML is widely used in writing the configurations. Okay. So let's have more discussion regarding the YAML file. What is the full form of YAML and what is the syntax of YAML? So YAML initially used to be called as yet another markup language. Okay, so initially it used to be called as yet another markup language. But as I have mentioned, YAML is widely accepted in data serialization language. That's why its new full form is YAML is in markup. Okay. One more thing. Whenever we are writing our YAML file, if you are mentioning .yml or .yaml, both of them are correct. We are good to mention as .yml or .yaml. Both the extensions are correct. So till now, what we have discussed is regarding the uses of YAML in terms of DevOps tools. The second one which we have discussed is what is data serialization language. Then we discussed why YAML is popular in comparison to JSON or XML. And the fourth one, which we have discussed, what is the full form of YAML and its extension. Okay, so our main goal is to write the configuration file and to interact to our target APIs. Okay, and as I have mentioned, before learning any technology of the target APIs, Docker, Kubernetes, Ansible, Helm, or any other DevOps tools, what we have to firstly understand, we have to firstly understand the YAML. Then we would be able to write the configuration file, and the end goal of the configuration file is to connect our target APIs. Okay, so the next important thing which we need to discuss is the syntax of the first syntax is key value. Okay, if you are writing anything in YAML file, I would say my name colon Akash, then this one will be treated as key and value. If I'm going to mention my age as 25, then this one will be treated as key and value. One more thing, whenever we are mentioning value, we are good to pass the string inside the single inverted comma, or we are good to pass the string in double inverted comma. Both of them are fine. Okay. The second syntax of YAML is the comments. If you want to pass any comments in YAML file, what we have to use, we have to use the pound sign. And whatever the things we are going to mention after the pound sign, it will be treated as, okay. So let's do a quick demo to understand key value pairs and comments. We are good to mention .yml or I think I already have the file, so let me mention 1, 2, 3 to make it unique. And we are good to mention .yml or .yaml file. Let me close the YAML files. So I'm going to mention my name, colon, and Akash, and my age, colon 25. So what the first thing I have mentioned, this thing, it would be called as key. Whatever the things we are going to have in the left hand side, it will be treated as key, and the right hand will be treated as value. Okay, and here what I have mentioned the value without the inverted comma. We are good to mention in single inverted comma or in double inverted comma. All three values are correct. Okay. The second one which we have discussed is passing the command. I'll say I want to provide some information regarding this name key. So what I will do, I will use this as sign, and then I'll mention name of the user. Okay. In the same way, if I want to pass the comment for the age, I will mention as sign and age of the user. So this is the two basic syntax of YAML which we need to understand. Apart from this, we have the other syntax also. But firstly, I want to discuss regarding one of the important topic which I mentioned at the time of comparison between XML and JSON and YAML is indentation. So exactly, what is the exact meaning of indentation? Okay, let's take example. We have one folder called documents. inside this document folder, I have one folder name called as resume. Okay. And inside this resume, I have resume dot doc file, and I have one more folder called as photos. Okay. And here I have file called as akash.pic. Okay. Are you able to understand what I'm talking about? We have one folder called documents, and inside this document, we have two folders, resume and photos. Okay. If you want to write the YAML file for this one, so what would be the process? So let me open the Visual Studio Code and explain it. I'm going to create a file name called as indentation dot, I'll mention YAML. As I have mentioned, both the syntax are correct. So I'm going to mention here, I'll mention documents, okay, because documents is my parent folder. And inside this document, I have two more folders. One is resume, and inside this resume, I have a file name called as resume.doc, and another folder which I have, which is photos, and here I have akash.png. Okay, so here comes very interesting question. We have the document folder, and inside this documents folder, what we have? We have resume and photos folder. But if you see here, the documents, resume and photos, all of them are on the same level. So if we are going to go through this YAML file, according to this YAML file, this is not the hierarchy. The hierarchy is we have one documents folder, and apart from the documents folder at the same level, we have one more folder called resume and I would say photos. Okay, all the three folders are present on the same level. To represent the resume and photos folder are present inside the document, what we have to follow? We have to follow a proper indentation. So the right in YAML file for this one, it would be documents colon. Then we have to follow proper indentation. So what is the exact meaning of indentation? The meaning of indentation is space. Okay. So line number 8, I'm going to place one space. See, when space is present, I'm going to mention resume column, resume dot, and the second one I'm going to mention photos dot akash dot png. So this one is correct. Why? Because we have followed the proper indentation. Means we have followed the proper spacing to show document is our main folder, and inside the documents what we have the resume and photos which is present inside the document. And to mention that resume and the photos, both of them are at the same level, we have mentioned the same space at the photos also. If we are going to mention, I would say, like this, do you think it is correct? The answer is no. Why? Because we have not followed the proper indentation, proper spacing to show resume and photos are present on the same level. Or else, if I'm going to mention like, sorry, there's an issue. while copying. Let me copy it again. If I'm going to mention like this, do you think it is correct? It is 100% correct. Why? Because if we have taken 1, 2, 3, 4 space, we have followed the same spacing for photo also. Okay, which means resume and photo folder, both of them are on the same file. So this is the perfect example of indentation. Whenever we create any YAML file, we have to make sure we are following the proper indentation. If we are not going to follow the proper indentation, our whole YAML file will be wrong like this. Okay, so let's continue our discussion with the other syntax of YAML. Third syntax is object. Okay, so what is object? Object is a collection of key and value. Okay, if we are going to mention first underscore name colon, and I'm going to pass my name as Akash. Okay, and I'm going to mention last underscore name colon Kumar. Then both the two values are key and value. This is the part which we have already discussed. So the next thing is, what is an object? If I'm going to mention here as users colon, then this user will be called as object. Okay, and what it has? It has the collection of key and value. Okay, the fourth syntax is okay. So what is the exact meaning of boolean? In the last example, we have mentioned about object, we have mentioned about the key, we have mentioned about the another key. Okay, but the values are in string. Okay, if I'm going to mention age, it would be in number. So if I'm going to mention is underscore email underscore verified, let me clear it, write it again, verified colon. So what we are going to mention, either true or false. Okay, apart from true, we have one more option called yes, and we have one more option called false. So overall, to mention true, we have two more options. In the same way, for false, we are good to say no or off. Okay, so it means, we write it again. So we have false, we have no, and we have off. All three of the thing means the same. So let's do a quick demo to understand object and boolean. I'll mention objects dot YML. So as I mentioned, if I'm going to mention first underscore user colon Akash, sorry, I'll mention here first underscore name colon Akash. I'll mention last underscore name. It would be colon as Kumar. Age I will mention colon 25. So what is an object? The collection of key and value, it would be called as object. So all these things are defining about what? It is defining about the user. I mentioned user underscore details colon. Okay. So this one, it would be called as an object. Okay, and as we have discussed, all these three values to be called as key and value. But YAML work on the principle of indentation. Indentation. So, do you think this one is correct? The answer is no. So, with the current indentation, it would be first, last. So if you see here, we have user underscore details. That is our main folder, user underscore details. And in this one, what we have the other folder called first underscore name, last name, and age. That's why we have followed the proper spacing. All three of them are aligned in a single line. Okay. So the next thing which we discussed regarding the Boolean. Okay. Let me mention here is email underscore verified for this user. I'll mention two. Okay. And this value it would be treated as Boolean. As mentioned, we are good to mention here yes on. All the three things it would be same. And same in the case of false. All three of them will be treated as same. Okay. Let's continue our discussion with other syntax of YAML. So the fifth syntax is, so what is the exact meaning of list? I would say what we have done now, we have one user underscore details. Okay. But inside this user underscore details, but in real time scenarios, we are going to have n number of users. So how we are going to write a YAML for n number of users? So we need to use list. And we have the two options. One, we are good to mention using hyphen or within the square bracket. So let's do a quick demo to understand it. You see here, I have mentioned about one user. I'm going to mention about one more user. Here, it would be called as Amit Kumar and age 31 and is email verified? No, it is false. So as we have discussed, to mention the list, what we have to do, we have to use hyphen. And then again, we have to follow the proper indentation. Okay, so in this case, this one, it would be my first list and this one will be my second list. Okay, want to add one more attributes of hobbies. Then what we have to write? We have to write hobbies colon. We are good to, as I mentioned, we are good to use a square bracket for single values. I would say cricket, chess. For this user, I'm going to mention hobbies colon. We are good to mention the same thing, cricket hyphen. Okay, you see here what I've done. User details. This is the entry for first user, and this is the entry for second user. Okay, but inside this first user, we have one key called hobbies, and here we are passing multiple value for it. So I have mentioned this one inside the list. As I mentioned, we are good to mention hyphen and a square bracket. So here I have mentioned the things in a square bracket. In the same way, if you want to pass the hobbies, then we are good to mention hyphen. Hyphen means list. Okay. So both of them are correct. Till now, what we have discussed is syntax of YAML. Why we need to understand the syntax of YAML? To write a YAML file. Okay. And what is the purpose of this YAML file? The YAML file is basically responsible to connect to our target APIs. Okay. So let's take example. we have written a YAML file of Kubernetes, which is going to interact to our target Kubernetes API. Okay. Right now, we do not need to focus on how to write a YAML file for Kubernetes. Okay. We are going to have a detailed discussion how to write the YAML for Kubernetes, what is the meaning of API version, kind, metadata specification, and all. But firstly, we need to understand what is the syntax of, okay. So if you see on the first line, it is API version colon v1. So what it is, I'm just going to pass comment. It is key and is key and value. The same thing we have here. The same thing we have for the second line. It is key and value. Third one also, what it is an object. Why? Because it has the key and then it has the collection of key and value. So it will be called as object. Again, the line 4 will be called as key and value, and the line 5 will be called as object. Okay, and again the line number 6 will be called as an key and value, and line number 6 again it will be called as object. Okay, and here on line number 8 you will say what it is. It is an object, but it is not correct. I would say it is partially correct because this is list of an object. Why? Because here if you see on line number 9 we have hyphen, and we already have a very detailed discussion. If you are going to mention hyphen or square bracket, it will represent what? A list. That's why line number 8 containers will be called as list of an object. Okay. Again, line number 9 it will be called as key value. Line number 10 again it will be called as key value, and line number 11 next what we have, it is a collection of lists, so it will be called as list of object. Let me mention found, paste here, and this one it will be called as key value, and again this one line number 13 it will be called as list of an object because the entries which we have mentioned using hyphen, and again the same thing for line number 14 and line number 10. So in this example what we have done, we have the YAML file which is written for the Kubernetes API interaction. Right now, we are not focusing, as I have mentioned, what is the API version, kind, metadata, but our first objective is to understand the syntax of. We are able to understand. This one is key value object. This one we have list of an object. What is the logic behind it? Why? What is the meaning of hyphen? What is the meaning of this indentation too? If you see API version, I would say most important thing which we need to understand is indentation. You see here, our API version, kind, metadata, and specification are on the same level, which means all of them are on the same means all of them are on the same hierarchy. But as you are able to see on line number 3, there is a proper indentation because this metadata details are provided by name and labels. And again, in labels, detail are provided by app colon nginx. That's why there is proper indentation. If I would say, if you are going to mention like this, do you think it would be correct? No, it would not be. Okay. Then the next one which we have mentioned under the specification, we have containers, and then in containers, what we have? We have right now only single container, but this list hyphen means list. So we are good to mention one more container detail. If you want, it would be like this. Okay. So the syntax, it would be like this. Okay. I know at initial stage when you are going to write the YAML file, it would be a bit confusing. It would be a bit challenging to make sure our whole file has proper indentation and all. So I have one of the online editor name called as YAML lint, where you're good to paste your YAML file and good to check is it the YAML file has the proper indentation. Okay. See what it is saying? It is saying our YAML file is valid. Let me intentionally do some mistake and try to understand. What I'm going to do, if you see here, my hyphen and this hyphen means my first container information and my second container information, both of them are correct because we have followed the proper indentation. Okay, let me intentionally do one mistake. Let me press on space. Right now, both of them are not aligned to each other. Second container values are not proper aligned with the first one, and it is not correct. Okay, let me copy this one and check in our online. Okay, let me click on go. See where we are getting this error? We are getting this error on line 16. Line 16 on this one. Why? Because we have not followed the proper indentation. So what we have to do on line number 16, right now, the container 1 details and the container second details, both of them are aligned to each other. So let me copy it and paste it again in our line tool, and let me click on go. See, our YAML file is valid. So as I have mentioned, if you have noticed in our initial discussion, when I was doing a quick comparison between JSON file, XML file, and YAML file, I mentioned to you YAML, we are good to, it is very easy to read, it is very easy to write, but we have to follow only one thing, which is proper indentation. If you're following this proper indentation, you'll not get any kind of error or any challenges. But in JSON and YAML, it is a bit complicated to read, to write, and the most important thing, to understand. Okay. So we are left with two more syntax. Let me do it quickly. So we had a very detailed discussion regarding list. So the sixth one is multi line string. So what is the exact meaning of it? I would say I'm passing one value user underscore name colon Akash. Okay, and I'm passing password password as admin 123. Okay, so how we are going to pass this value? To pass this value as a multi-line string, we have to use this pipe symbol. Okay, this pipe symbol will represent, this one will be treated as first line, this one will be treated as second. Whenever we are writing any YAML pipe and we are passing anything after this pipe symbol, it will be treated this one as one first line and this one will be treated as second line. But if we are going to mention as greater one, so although in the YAML file it will be mentioned as username colon Akash and password colon 12 admin 123 in a separate line, but all both of them will be treated as like this: username colon Akash, then password colon admin 123. Okay, so if you're going to mention greater than, it will be treated as a single line, and the last syntax is the seventh one. In real-time scenarios, we are not going to write a single YAML file. Okay, let's take example of Kubernetes. Okay, whenever you are writing a Kubernetes configuration file, it will have n number of YAML file, like our deployment.yaml file. I would say service.yml file. Then the third one, it would be hpa.yml file. Then I would say service account.yml file. So do you think it is a good idea to write or to create 4 YAML file? The answer is no. So in this case, what we are going to do, we are going to write a single YAML. Okay, I'm going to write a single YAML file, and in this YAML file, I'm going to mention about the deployment configuration. Then I'm going to mention 3 hyphens. Then again, I'm going to mention regarding the service. I'm going to mention 3 hyphens. Then again, it would be HPA. Then the 3 hyphens. It's this one. And I'll mention regarding this service account. So so all the 4 YAML file configuration will be, I would say, all the 4 YAML file configuration will be present in a single YAML file. How we are going to achieve? Using this 3. Okay, let's do a quick demo to understand the multi-line string, multi-line string, and multiple YAML documents. Okay, already have one file name called as multistring.yaml. If you see from line number 1 to 5, it should make sense to you. We already have a detailed discussion, but at line number 6, what I have mentioned this pipe symbol. So what is the meaning of this pipe symbol? Line number 7 will be treated as first entry, and then on line number 8 will be treated as, second entry. Okay, if I'm going to mention here greater than, although I have mentioned the 7 and 8 values in a separate line, but its entry will be in a single like this. Let me write it on Visual Studio Code. Say config to, and here I'm going to mention here the greater one. So if I'm going to mention in two separate lines, but its entries will be like this. Okay. So this is the difference between using this pipe symbol and greater than. The last syntax of YAML which we discussed is multiple YAML documents. You see here we have deployment YAML file. Then in the same YAML file I have mentioned service, then HPA, then namespace, then again the deployment one. So if you see here we have around 5 YAML files. What we have done at the end of each YAML file, I have mentioned 3 hyphen. So it means this one represent one YAML file. Again, this one will represent the starting of new YAML, and this one will be again the starting of new YAML. The one benefit is rather than writing 5 YAML files, what we have done, we have written only single YAML file, and we have separated each YAML file using hyphen. Okay. So with this, we have completed our discussion regarding the YAML. Okay. So thanks a lot for watching the video.
I hope you have gone through the video. Okay, so let's start our discussion in terms of how to write a YAML manifest for our Kubernetes configuration. In Kubernetes, whenever you are going to write a YAML file, the first thing which you need to mention in Kubernetes is API version. Okay, so each and every object has its own API version. So to get the API version, we are good to run a command called kubectl explain and our object name. Let me run a command called kubectl explain for the pod. Kubectl explain pod. If you see here, what is the version? Version is v1. If I'm going to mention any other object, I would say deployment. See, for deployment also the version is v1. Okay, so let me run one more object, kubectl explain HPA. If you see here, the version is v2. Okay, while the version of deployment or pod was v1. So we are good to ignore this one. We are going to have a detailed discussion why some object has version 1, some object has version 2. Okay, what is the logic behind it in our authentication and authorization video. But we are good to get the information of version from running this command for any objects in Kubernetes. Okay, the second one which we need to discuss is kind. Kind means what you want to create. Okay, right now we are focusing on creation of our pod, so we are good to mention as pod. But in future, when we are going to create our deployment, we'll mention deployment. For replica set, we'll mention replica set. For service, we'll mention, I would say, service. Like whatever the object you want to create in Kubernetes, you need to update here in kind. Okay, and the third one is metadata. Metadata. The way we initiated a command to create a pod, what we mentioned kubectl run, and our pod name was nginx. Okay, and then it was image. So while writing your YAML file, if you want to mention the pod name, you need to pass this value inside your metadata. Okay, the name of a pod you are good to pass. Apart from that, we have the other options like labels we are good to pass. Labels is the next topic which we are going to discuss, and we have annotation we are good to pass. The fourth thing which we need to mention is specification. Okay, in this specification we are going to pass the image information, or apart from that we are good to pass the other details also, which we are going to discuss in our upcoming videos. But for now I'm good to say whatever the command we have initiated like kubectl run, then nginx, and then what we have mentioned our image name. Okay, so to run the same thing in YAML, in terms of API version, you need to mention the version of our object. Here you're creating an object called pod, so you need to mention of its API version. Then the metadata. In metadata, we are going to mention the name, and finally the image we are going to pass in a specification. Okay, so let's create our pod using YAML configuration files. Okay, so I'm going to open my Visual Studio. If you see here, I have created a folder name called as day8-kubectl. So let me quickly create a file for us. The file name I'm going to mention as multicon.yaml, and we're good to mention YAML or YML. Both of them are fine. Why I have mentioned this file name as multi-container? The logic is, if you see, this is the API version. This API version is related to our kind. So what we are creating? We are creating pod. So we need to mention the API version as v1. Then we have the metadata. Regarding the metadata I mentioned, this is the name of our pod. Okay. Then we have the specification. In this specification, we are going to have our containers details. As I have mentioned, this one is a pod, and pod is the smallest unit in our Kubernetes cluster. The smallest thing which you are good to create is pod, and inside the pod we are good to have n number of containers. So here what we are doing, we are creating two containers, container 1 and container 2. That's why if you see on line number 6, it is mentioned as containers, and this is hyphen, which means it is a list. The name of my first container is cont1, and this is the image which we are using, and the name of my container 2 is cont2, and the image is redis. Okay, so let me implement this YAML configuration. So again, I'm going to open my terminal. Okay, let me copy the path, clear this screen. We'll go to this path. One more thing, if you want to run the integrated terminal, you're good to do it. Okay, right now I'm not creating it because it is a bit challenging to explain if we have to share the screen like this. The better approach is to open a CMD and then implement the things. Okay, so to run this configuration file, what we have to mention, we have to run kubectl. Okay, then create. Okay, then -f, and what is my file name? My file name is multicon.yaml. Okay, I'm going to press enter and see our pod has been created. The command is kubectl get pods. So what is the status? It is currently creating. Let me run again kubectl get pods. So the current status of this pod is running. Okay, the name of this pod is multi-container. The nginx pod we created last time, the status of this pod is running, and restart 0, and we created around 17 seconds. The one thing which we have to notice in the ready column, okay, in the ready column, if you see the last pod which we created of our nginx, in the nginx what we had only one container. Okay, but in our multi-container pod we have two containers. Okay, that's why it is showing 2 hyphen by 2. Okay, means we have the two containers and both of them are in a running stage. Okay, if there would be any kind of issues, you won't see the two containers are running. And again the same command, we are good to run kubectl get pods hyphen override to get more information. Here you will get more information in terms of IP, in terms of node, and the nomination configuration. If you want to log in inside the pod, what is the command? The command is kubectl exec hyphen it interactive terminal. Then what is my pod name? My pod name is multicon. Okay, and then my sh, sorry, one typo, sh. If you see here what we are getting defaulted container 1 out of container 1 and 2. So in our last example, when we are creating nginx pod, so here we have only one container. So this command was automatically logged in the container which we have. But here in this case, what we have done, if this is my pod multi-container one, we have the two containers. Okay, so to log in inside the container one or container two, if you're not going to mention the container name, so by default we are going to log in inside the container one. Okay, and this is what it is mentioned here, defaulted container one out of container one and two. Okay, let me come outside of this container. Okay, and if you want to log in inside the container 2, what you have to do, after the pod name you have to mention hyphen c, and what is the name of my container 2 is cunt2, and enter. So currently we are inside the container 2. Okay, let me come outside of this container, and if you want to delete this pod, we are good to run a command called kubectl delete hyphen f, and what is my file name, multicon dot yaml. So our pod deletion process is started. Okay, let's check our pod status kubectl get pods. Okay, apart from that we have one more option to delete our pod, kubectl delete pod, and the pod name is nginx. Okay, there is one typo while writing the kubectl. See, our pod has been deleted. Okay, so with this we have completed our day 8 discussion